Good morning and welcome. My name is Stacy Metcalf and I am the Director of Western Region Government and Community Relations at Inova Loudoun Hospital. And I'm also proud to serve as the 2020 Chair of the Loudoun Chamber of Commerce and the Chamber's Public Policy Committee. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual PolicyMaker series event, State of Housing in Loudoun. Over the last 2 years, and even more so today, addressing the housing needs of our workforce has become a top priority of the Loudoun Chamber. Prior to the pandemic, the largest obstacle in business growth was the inability to find talent to fill our open positions, specifically in hospitality, the trades, education, and healthcare and public safety. If we are unable to create more opportunity for our workforce to access local housing options, then business growth and overall economic prosperity for our region will remain challenged. Today, we are thrilled to have two experts with us this morning to discuss the state of housing in Loudoun and how we will look towards the future together. One housekeeping note before we start, I want to give you permission to be on your phones this morning, but only for one reason, to share with your many social media followers your thoughts on today's program. When you do so, please use our hashtag LCCCPolicy. That's an L followed by 3 C's. And please also remember to tag the Chamber at Loudoun Chamber. I would also like to let everybody know that we will have a Q&A session after we hear from our esteemed speakers. I will begin with some questions and then we will turn to the audience. Therefore, if you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Provided we have time, we will get to as many questions as we can. Next, I would like to recognize our wonderful sponsors. Today's event and our entire PolicyMaker series would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. First, a thank you to our signature series sponsor, My Hospital Home, Inova Loudoun Hospital. We are proud to support the Chamber and the PolicyMaker series. As one of Loudoun's largest employers, we know that our biggest assets are the team members that come to work every day to care for our community. And at the end of each of those days, it is about the care given and the connections made at the bedside when our patients need us. That is why our values, patient always, our people, one team, integrity, and excellence drive everything we do. We are neighbors taking care of neighbors. But if our healthcare professionals can't live in the community where they work because they can't afford to do so, we all need to be concerned. That is why this morning's topic is so important to us. And like for all of you, we look forward to this discussion. I would also like to give a big round of applause to our spotlight sponsor, Toth Financial Advisory Corporation and M&T Bank, who we'll hear from later on today. Please join me in recognizing our advocate sponsors for the 2020 PolicyMaker series. They are Access Point Public Affairs, Backflow Technology, Bank of Clark County, BCT, the Communities Bank, McGuire Woods Consulting, Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority, Modern Mechanical, the National Sports Medicine Institute, Northern Virginia Community College, Toth Financial Advisory Corporation, and Unmet. Please join me in thanking our policy series advocate sponsors. I would now like to recognize our enterprise sponsors for their invaluable support. They are Atlantic Union Bank, Community Foundation for Loudoun and Northern Fauquier Counties, Comstock, Dominion Energy, Genelia Research Campus, Sandy Spring Bank, Telos, the George Washington University Science and Technology Campus. Please join me in thanking our enterprise sponsors. It is now my pleasure to recognize our Chamber's 2020 business partner, the Economic Development Authority of Loudoun County, and the 2020 community partner, the Loudoun County Department of Economic Development. Also, please join me in thanking our media sponsor, Loudoun Now. At this time, I'd like to recognize the elected officials who are in attendance. From the Virginia General Assembly, please welcome Senator Barbara Favola, Delegate Dave LaRocque, Delegate Kathleen Murphy, and Delegate Ibrahim Samira. And from Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, please welcome Chair Phyllis Randall, Supervisor Julie Brisman, Supervisor Sylvia Glass, Supervisor Mike Turner, Supervisor Kristen Unstead, and Tiani Ivy on behalf of Vice Chair Karan Sains. It is now time to hear from our first spotlight sponsor. It's always a great day for me when I get to bring to our virtual stage my wonderful friend, Mitch Sproul from Toth Financial Advisory Corporation. Mitch, over to you.
Good morning, fellow members of the world's finest Chamber of Commerce. I have 4 minutes to do a couple things, tell you about Toth Financial and introduce Dr. Lisa Sturtevant, who I think will be an exciting speaker for us. Hope everybody's doing well. Please note my Santa Claus tie and ho, 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 Merry Christmas. And that is from all of us at Toth Financial. Happy, happy holidays. Merry Christmas. We hope you are faring well through the difficult COVID-19 days. Keep your attitudes high. We really believe, and I think the news is out there, that there's light at the end of the tunnel. So let's all keep smiling and make our chamber and our world around us great. Toth Financial has several core beliefs. We believe, one, that the United States stock market is the greatest financial story ever told. So that's a core belief for us. Two, related to one, the concept of public ownership of the world's greatest companies continues to be the best way to fund, in fact, if not a miracle that's lasted a long time, a growing and vibrant economy while creating employment and opportunity for everybody. Toth Financial has 16 people, employees who come to work each day, properly socially distanced, who believe that we've been given a gift of helping clients own shares of those public companies so they can meet their financial goals. How cool is that? So we watch and learn about great public companies and help clients to own these individual companies. Does it get any better than this? No, it really doesn't. Our company and our work is exciting. It's people-oriented. When you are comfortable, when we get through the pandemic, come visit us, just say hello. We love to get to know our chamber friends better. We acknowledge that COVID-19 has presented extreme difficulty for many American businesses and for many fellow Loudoun County businesses. We encourage all chamber members to continue to encourage one another, pray for, and think about not only our frontline workers in COVID-19, but many of our Loudoun businesses, particularly in tourism, the restaurant sector, wineries, breweries. Keep encouraging those folks, and to the extent you're comfortable, go out and support. We salute all the medium and small businesses. By the way, we are one, and encourage our great chamber to continue its advocacy on our behalf. Investment advisory and Toth Financial specifically has not been impacted really badly by COVID-19. In fact, our company has continued to grow. We added 2 employees this year, and we've grown to serving 522 clients, managing total assets of theirs of $650 million. Each client we work with has a customized portfolio based on their goals, needs, and risk tolerance. We have earned our clients strong returns while providing world-class customer service. What comes next in the stock market? We believe that the market, we measure mainly by the S&P 500, will probably have an average 6 to 7% up year in 2021. The biggest assumption in that prediction is that our country and the world can start to end, if not end altogether in 2021, the pandemic. COVID-19 remains the biggest threat, not only to people, but to our economy. Restaurants, theaters, shopping malls are going to lag behind. Medium and small businesses, right down to mom and pop size, will likely continue to struggle. Our portfolios are centered in the biggest companies in the country, many of whom have seen an economic benefit from the pandemic. So the pandemic's a negative. There are significant positives. A year ago, we were pre-COVID and the US economy was on very strong footing. We were setting up for the highest gross domestic product, also known as GDP growth year, in over a decade. That's one. 2, additional stimulus looks likely. That would help the market. 3, interest rates remain spectacularly low, where these are large public companies, and for that matter, companies of all sizes who can borrow and invest in a positive way are going to benefit. 4, the Federal Reserve Bank remains accommodative, and the Fed continues to pledge all the tools necessary to fuel growth. 5, many unemployed by COVID-19, not all, but many, and actually I believe it's most, where COVID-19 caused unemployment, they have found new employment. And number 6, for us here at Toth Financial, maybe the most important, it's kind of our secret sauce. Our largest public companies, the nations and those that we follow at Toth, and the analysts who follow them continue to believe that earnings will grow. So to the extent that the stock markets follow what the underlying companies earn and then disclose publicly each quarter, we believe that continues to remain a big positive for the market. I am going to introduce Lisa Sturtevant, Dr. Lisa Sturtevant. Thank you for listening. Go Loudoun County, go Loudoun County Chamber. Okay, pause. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Lisa Sturtevant. Dr. Sturtevant leads the Virginia Realtors research on housing market and economic conditions throughout Virginia. She has been involved in research and analysis on economic, demographic, and housing market issues and local housing solutions for more than 20 years. She knows our Loudoun County as she worked on the Loudoun County Housing Needs Assessment published in 2017. Lisa is a founder of LSA, an Alexandria, Virginia-based consulting firm that partners with local communities to provide comprehensive housing, economic, and demographic analyses and strategic planning to promote and support policy and development decisions. She served as vice president for research for the National Housing Conference, NHC, between 2013 and 2016. Prior to NHC, Lisa served as deputy director of the Center for Regional Analysis and associate research professor at the George Mason University School of Public Policy. Here is a grand education resume. Dr. Sturtevant completed her PhD in public policy from George Mason University, a master's degree in public policy from the University of Maryland, go Terps, Tom Bowman is sitting here with me, and a BS in mathematical economics from Wake Forest University. You might not think economists are fun, but they are. During the pandemic, Lisa and her husband have a goal of trying all 75 cocktails, not at once, mind you, but all 75 on the International Bartenders Association official cocktail list. They have started an Instagram account to track their progress. Lisa, welcome and thanks for Zooming in this morning.
Mitch, thank you very much. I really appreciate the introduction, and I thank you to the Chamber for the invitation to come and talk about housing today. I obviously wish that we could all be together in person, but I really appreciate the chance to share some information, some data on what we're seeing in the market and the economy. So I'm going to go through some PowerPoint slides, and I'm going to go through a lot of information, but I'll make sure that the slides are available through the Chamber so that if you want to peruse the data in more detail, that you can do so. I think, just a few things to think about as we kind of get into what's going on in the housing market. We did talk a little bit in some of the opening remarks about what's happening in the economic recovery. And I will say that the sort of favorite shape to talk about these days is a K-shaped recovery. And what that means is we are seeing this recovery for some members of our community and not for others. And that's really important as we think about housing needs going forward. Homeowners, folks in higher wage jobs, people in professional and technical services jobs have done fairly well. Renters, lower wage workers, people of color, people in the tourism and retail and restaurant sectors still face a lot of financial challenges overall when we look at the recovery. Mitch mentioned interest rates. Mortgage rates are remaining historically low as well, which has benefited homeowners and some would-be home buyers. We're going to look at home sales activity, and home sales has really been the bright spot in the economy, and in Loudoun County, it's been no exception. And then lastly, think about what we might think about as we do see this vaccine become more widespread. What will life look like after COVID? So just a little bit on the economy, things you already know, we saw a pretty dramatic decline in GDP in the second quarter and a rebound in the third quarter. And really over the past 6 months, we've been watching the jobs that were lost in the spring be steadily added back, although the pace of job growth at the national level has slowed. I think it's been pretty clear that the kind of the jobs that were easy to bring back have been brought back, and the work ahead is a little bit harder. We've seen that in the DC metro area as well. We've seen job growth fairly steadily. We had a little bit of a blip there, but fairly steadily month to month for the past few months. The unemployment rate region-wide was 5.6% in October, but lower in Loudoun County. So the trends are all in the right direction on the employment side. But I think as we think about what happens in 2021, we can talk a little bit about where we think the risks might be for a slowdown in this recovery, and where we might be back to pre-recession job totals. Like I said, I think all the trajectory is headed in the right direction, but just to put it in a little bit of perspective, this chart shows the last few recessions and kind of the point at which the Washington area was back at pre-recession job totals. And you can see both in the early 90s recession and in the Great Recession, it took more than 3 years for the DC region to gain back the jobs that were lost. You can see the current recession in that red is just a much more dramatic drop, a much more dramatic uptick as well. But I think we'll expect that that increase, that slope up, to start to flatten out a little bit over time. And it could be well into 2022 or even beyond before we see full recovery in this recession. Just a note, there's nothing really for the early aughts, the early 2000s recession, since the Washington area fared pretty well, didn't really go into any significant job loss back then. Mitch mentioned more interest rates, and mortgage rates have really been incredibly favorable. Homeowners are able to refinance. Buyers are able to get into the market a little bit easier in some cases. We'll talk about when that's not necessarily true. And the 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate has been below 3% for 20 consecutive weeks. And there really all signs are that the rates will stay low into 2021, and will make it easier for not only for businesses to borrow, but for existing homeowners to refinance, and for potentially for new home buyers to get into the market. So let's talk a little bit about the housing market. I'm going to present data here on Loudoun County. On our website, we also track data for all the other kind of local communities in Virginia, as well as the statewide numbers. But first, let's look at what's happened to home sales. So this chart shows monthly home sales in 1 year compared to a year before. And so you can see over there in the 2020 numbers, those two big bars that went negative, that was March or May and April and May. And you can see since then, we've had steady increases in home sales activity. Really, the housing market boomed back really quickly in March and April and May. I don't know if you remember, it was March 13th. I remember driving back from Roanoke with my mom and my son, and we got the news that schools were closed and events were being canceled. And I feel like sort of March, everything started to kick in. And so we saw a really dramatic slowdown in home sales activity in April, and then again in May, as people were remaining at home. I will say, a testament to the governor here in Virginia, unlike in some places, the real estate industry was kept open as an essential business. And so with some pivoting to virtual transactions, some greater use of e-notaries and other sort of online ways of completing transactions, the housing market really boomed back. Home sales were up nearly 34% in October in Loudoun County compared to a year ago. And what we're seeing is that the buyers in the market have come back really quickly, and the sellers have come back much more slowly. So what this chart shows is how many homes were available for sale in the county in the current month compared to the same month a year ago. So inventory has been declining really for the last 5 years. And this is the supply side, right? So the demand side is really strong in Loudoun County and in kind of Virginia generally. But the supply side is where really the constraints have been. And in October, right, the inventory of available homes for sale was less than half of what it was compared to a year ago. And this months of supply measure, which Realtors track, shows that there was only about a month's of supply of condos and townhomes in Loudoun County, and less than that when you look at the single family stock. So this means how long would it take for the existing stock of available homes for sale to be drawn down, at kind of the current pace of home purchasing. Anything below 5 or 6 is a really tight sort of seller's market, and we've really been at that for a long time, but this is a testament to how constrained housing is. So, right, you don't need to be an economist or even to have taken that Econ 101 class to know when demand is strong and supply is low, that prices go up. And in October, the median sales price in Loudoun County was about $542,000, so more than $500,000, condos, townhomes, single family. And that's up 8.3% from a year ago. So you can see steady price appreciation year over year for really for the last several years. Statewide in Virginia, we've seen double-digit price appreciation for 3 consecutive months, and all signs are for the upward pressure on prices to continue. So, as Stacy opened us up talking about how to make sure there is sufficient housing for workers who support our critical industries in the county and in the region, this upward pressure on prices, which has been good for homeowners, right? New data came out to show that the level of housing equity nationwide is at record levels. And so it's great for existing homeowners who are looking to stay in the area for a long time. But for new residents, for young workers, for first-time homebuyers, it's becoming increasingly challenging. And if we look a little bit more detail at some of the sort of what it would take to purchase a home in Loudoun County, if we look at year to date, kind of the first 10 months of the year, the median sales price over that 10-month period was nearly $600,000 for single family homes and about $360,000 for condos and townhomes. So what would it take for a typical worker or a family to purchase a home? Well, a lot of talk has been made about these declining mortgage rates. And in many cases, if you think about only from the monthly payment standpoint, low mortgage rates certainly do make that monthly payment lower for would-be home buyers. So let's take a look at how this plays out. So back a year ago, the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage rate was 3.68%, according to Freddie Mac. Still pretty low by historic standards, but we've fallen nearly a percentage point, right, in the last year. So what did that do to monthly payments? So in December 2019, the median sales price in Loudoun County for a single family home was about $520,000. Okay, so that's the blue column. You can see what it would take given a 3.68% mortgage rate. Your monthly payment would be about $22.67. That's that last line. So in December of this year, a year later, home prices have increased pretty dramatically. The median price is now $600,000. But you can see that with the lower mortgage rate, the actual monthly payment only goes up by about $48. So the median price went up by $80,000, but your monthly payment goes up by $48. So that's one way to think about how mortgage rates impact the market, but that's not the whole picture, right? And so if you do I use NerdWallet, you can use different ways to kind of come to this conclusion and put in different parameters, but even at a super low 3% mortgage rate at $600,000, assuming a 5% down payment, which is, according to our members, is pretty typical for home buyers to be putting 5% down, assuming $500 in additional monthly debt, credit cards, car payments, that you need an annual income of $137,000 to buy the median priced single family home in Loudoun County. Looking at the condo or townhome side of things, you need an annual income of $82,000, and $18,000 down payment. And so there are many workers, including a lot of those critical healthcare workers that Stacy mentioned, some of our public sector workers, a lot of our entry level and younger workers who are really fueling the rise in the technical services sector in Loudoun County. That puts homeownership out of reach. And then I get asked a lot about student debt. So what if you have a $400 student debt payment, which is the average student debt payment right now? Then you need an income of about $94,000 to qualify for the typical townhome or condo. So that's just to put some of these numbers in perspective, that even as for some part of the economy, the recovery is really taken off and people are feeling, there's many folks who feel in much better financial situations. The savings rate has increased for some parts of the economy. This is still the picture that folks are facing when they look to buy a home in Loudoun County. On the rental side, it's actually been a little bit of an interesting story lately. According to CoStar data, this shows a year-over-year change in rent in, these are typically larger buildings. And you can see in the second quarter of 2020, we actually saw negative rent growth. And it's looking like we might see rents decline slightly as well at the fourth quarter of 2020. And we're seeing that actually more dramatically in places like Arlington and close in Fairfax County, where there was a little bit of an oversupply, certainly in DC too. We're seeing rent decline on that Class A side. And rents are still up around $1,600, $1,700, close to $1,900 if you're looking at single family rentals. And so just to, again, to put that in perspective, and I know Sarah's going to talk more about kind of opportunities to help folks who are trying to access rental and homeownership housing, you're really looking at needing incomes well into the $60,000 and $70,000, which is really far beyond where a lot of worker wages are in terms of looking across the economy. So let's talk a little bit about an outlook for the housing market and for the economy before I turn it back over to Stacy. We do expect that the economic recovery that has been underway for the last several months will continue throughout the fourth quarter. It does seem as though the pace of the recovery is slowing. The hard work is ahead of us. So as Mitch mentioned, there is a whole group of folks who lost their jobs back in the spring, who have been rehired or who have found new jobs. And those have sort of been the easy gains, and they've been had. The harder gains are ahead of us. The industries that have been hardest hit, the industries that were mentioned, tourism, restaurants, leisure and hospitality, the hotel industry, and then other jobs. We talk about those industries a lot, but office support professionals, administrative support, building services professionals, some healthcare offices have still seen a lot of that staff being laid off or being fired and not being hired back at this point, as there's still a long way to go to open up those businesses fully. So I think there's a sense that there is a need for additional public assistance through a federal stimulus package. And the news, I guess, yesterday or this morning in the Post was that there's been a stall on the talk in Congress of this sort of massive or $900 billion stimulus package. And really I think the prospects for a strong recovery in the first quarter has a lot to do with how Congress is able to come together on a stimulus and how well targeted those stimulus payments are, including direct stimulus to individuals and families in need, and also stimulus targeted at those businesses that are most adversely affected. So I think we're taking a look here for maybe a little bit of a softening, someone asked the other day whether there's going to be a double dip recession, and it doesn't appear so. We are in a little bit of a softening of the recovery, a soft patch as you were, and sort of looking ahead to later in the spring to see that recovery and that engine get moving a little bit more quickly. And whether or not there'll be a resurgence in COVID cases, obviously this news about the vaccine is fantastic news, and looking to see how quickly and in what way the vaccine is rolled out will be critically important. And as I mentioned earlier, we do expect rates to remain low, really low into 2021. There's no indication that mortgage rates will increase. And as a result, really strong demand for housing generally and home ownership in particular in Northern Virginia and in Loudoun County. And that housing affordability, which really never left the discussion, right? We've been talking about housing affordability for really for a better part of a couple of decades, right, in Loudoun County, and we'll still see that. And part of it really is this supply issue that we've talked about, and this is not an unfamiliar conversation in Loudoun or in most jurisdictions across Northern Virginia, but we've seen the level of new construction really sort of taper off. The solid line is the number of new single-family units permitted. The dashed is the multifamily. And you can see that even as new construction has leveled off, the population in the county continues to grow. And so what we're seeing is a lack of supply, or a limited supply, which is continuing to put upward pressure on prices and rents. And I do think, though, as we're sort of seeing a shift of kind of what post-COVID life will look like, we have seen more interest on the for sale side and even on the rental side of suburban markets, of larger homes, larger rental units for those of us working from home, having dedicated space for an office, having more space for kids to be doing virtual school. And so you can see, while the red shows that communities across the state that have seen an uptick in home sales activity, it's actually the blue counties that have seen the fastest growth in home sales activity. Those rural and exurban counties have seen faster sales activity. And you can see that ring around Loudoun County and Prince William and Fairfax. Winchester, Rappahannock, Clark, you're seeing much faster sales activity in those parts of the state, potentially as people are moving a little bit further from the urban core. So I'm going to leave you with one thought. I know it's on a lot of people's minds. What will happen after COVID? Will we see this sort of working from home continue to be a long-term trend? And I think that I think the jury's still out, but I think the expectation is that what we'll see is more of a hybrid. A survey from JLL recently found that only 10% of folks who are working from home really want to continue working full-time from home post-COVID. But, and that's the purple box. The gray box is people's feelings before COVID. But there is a sense that people will want some flexibility and work from home part-time. What that means to me from a kind of real estate demand side is that this talk of people moving to far-flung areas, right, in order to live in rural communities and be able to kind of zoom into work every day, people are still going to need to be close enough to their place of work to get into work a day or two a week. And so I think this sort of looking at that outer ring of markets will actually be more and more important over time. So just to end, and we have this data up on our website, we do an annual economic and housing market forecast for the state. And so we're expecting in 2021, which is sort of the last column, jobs to be up 2.2%, unemployment to be down. And then on the housing market side, expect that home sales activity will be relatively flat in 2021, primarily because of the constraints on the supply side. We do expect strong price growth, new housing construction to increase, although not enough. And as I mentioned, mortgage rates to stay around the 3% level for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. I'm going to turn it back over to Stacy. I know we're going to do questions here, but please do know you can always reach out to me or look for more information on our website. And I do want to thank you again for the chance to share some of this information. And so Stacy, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Lisa, for that excellent presentation. We look forward to hearing more from you during our Q&A after our second presenter. And I just want to thank you also for your offer to make your slides available to our chamber audience, because I know that everybody will benefit from that. So thank you very much. Everyone, here to introduce our next speaker, I'd like to recognize our second spotlight sponsor, M&T Bank. Representing M&T Bank today is Luke Coates and Adam Hamad. Please join me in welcoming Luke and Adam to our virtual stage here, thanking M&T Bank for supporting today's program.
Thank you, Stacy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for spending time with us this morning. I'm not wearing a Christmas tie today like Mitch, but I am wearing pants today for this Zoom meeting, so that's That's always a good day when you put pants on. Adam and I are appreciative to be with you for this event today on the state of housing in Loudoun. It's definitely an important topic and has a lot of impact to the residents and businesses within the community. And it's one that we are very proud to be a part of. For 164 years, M&T Bank has been committed to the communities we serve. And this year, with all the challenges, it was no different. Community is most important to us. We demonstrated our commitment to community through our work with the federal government's Paycheck Protection Program, our continued charitable contributions, and our efforts around providing financial education. And these are just a few examples of the lengths that our great employees go to make a difference in people's lives. Let's talk about SBA. It's been quite a busy and challenging year for SBA. We continue to be a consistent leader for SBA lending in the community, which helps newer businesses get up and running or existing businesses thrive and grow. During the SBA's 2020 fiscal year, M&T ranked 5th in the nation for SBA lending. We also were just recently recognized by our small business customers who gave us a standout rating for banks' COVID-19 response in the latest Greenwich Crisis Response Index, when we were just one of 7 banks across the country to receive this recognition. There were a lot of issues that businesses had during this process, so it was important to us that our clients felt that we performed so well at the time in which our business owners needed us the most. It was worth all the late nights and just knowing that we were enabling businesses to keep going and retain their employees. We consistently receive Greenwich Awards annually for excellence in small business banking and SBA lending. And I believe this national recognition reflects M&T's commitment to helping small businesses and the communities thrive by providing small business owners with valuable expertise and advice along with flexible financing solutions. Locally here in Loudoun, our branch employees have kept the doors open to continue to be present for the community. And Adam and I partner to serve on Loudoun Chamber's GovCon, Ambassador, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion committees, along with our colleague Al Garcia, who serves on the Chamber's board. Both Adam and I are your resources here in Loudoun for business banking needs. So if there's anything that we can help you out with, we would be happy to follow up with you after today's event. So I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Adam Hamad to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Sarah Coyle Etro. Sarah is currently serving as the project manager of Loudoun County's Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan. The Board of Supervisors directed the plan to be drafted as a key implementation step of the recently adopted 2019 General Plan. The plan will drive solutions to address the county's unmet housing needs developed through a strategic planning process. Sarah also serves as the county's first housing coordinator, leading the newly established Office of Housing, overseeing many housing programs, including the county's multifamily development loan program. Sarah has an undergraduate degree in sociology from the Washington College and a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Virginia Tech. Go Hokies. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And especially appreciate being able to serve on the panel today with Lisa, who I had a chance to work with as we were developing the housing needs assessment. I'm going to share my screen here and get my, let's see, oh boy, bear with me just a second. There we go. Great, thank you. Sorry about that. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk with you today and tell you about Loudoun County's process for developing the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan. The Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan, along with the zoning ordinance revision, which is also going on right now, are the 2 key implementation steps initiated by the Board of Supervisors upon the adoption of the 2019 Comprehensive Plan. And both of them will have considerable impact on the provision of affordable housing in the county. Many issues were identified in the 2019 plan, and they've been reiterated in the more than 30 engagement opportunities we've conducted as part of the Unmet Housing Needs Plan. They include, we've got a disparity between what people can afford and what's produced. Housing costs are increasing faster than incomes. We have a dwindling affordable supply and limited available land, lack of diversity in unit sizes and costs, and a tight rental and purchase market. There's no one solution, and there's no one need. So we need a variety of approaches, and there are many factors to consider. There's no one size fits all solution to the problem. So the aim of the plan is to address the diversity of need by providing concrete actions for how the county will address unmet housing needs in a systematic and comprehensive way with integrated programs, and will identify production targets over the short term, which is a 5-year period, and the long term. I do want to go over a few definitions. We tend to have a different language we talk when we talk about housing. So when we talk about affordable, we're not talking about a type of housing. We're talking about a household's ability to afford their housing situation. So affordable means paying no more than 30% of your income for your housing needs. For Loudoun County, based on the work that Lisa did for us in the housing needs assessment, and as included in policy in the comp plan, we've identified where we need to focus our efforts is on the unmet housing needs for households with incomes below 100% of area median income. Area median income is a regional income measure. It's the middle income in the region, where half of households have incomes higher and half have incomes lower. But it's the measure that's used for income eligibility for federal, state, and our local programs. And so it's important because we often need to layer those programs as we address the issues of moderate and lower income people. In 2020, 100% of area median income for the Washington region is $126,000 a year for a family of 4, and $88,000 for a single person household. So just to translate that, $126,000 might be 2 entry-level or mid-level workers, perhaps in public service or IT support professionals, important components of our workforce. So the focus is definitely on how we can improve opportunities for our workforce and our citizens with housing they can afford. In 2017, the board received the housing needs assessment, and it identified 2 things. One is what our existing households are that were cost burdened. So these are, we have about 11,500 households as of 2015 that were paying more than they could afford really for housing. So they had to make a choice between housing and other types of expenditures in order to live in Loudoun. The housing needs assessment also identified what we would gain in terms of households over time. So by 2040, another 20,000 households with incomes below 100% of area median income. So the intent of the plan is to address disparity between affordability and housing costs for those households that are cost burdened, and also provide housing options to address unmet need. This is the scope that the board approved for the plan, and I'm happy to say we've moved through most of it so far. We have completed an extensive program evaluation of our existing programs. We've done considerable data development and mapping, completed all of the community engagement except for the public hearing that the board will convene. And we're focusing now on new programs and initiatives, establishing short-term priorities and production targets. We also have a staff participating closely as part of the zoning ordinance review. So key to implementation for addressing unmet need will be what our regulation says. And that comes in the way of the zoning ordinance. So they're participating closely to ensure that barriers are identified and that incentives are added to the ordinance so we can increase and reduce costs of development through zoning regulation. Housing is not a standalone issue. It is the cornerstone to economic health and progress, to the stability and well-being of the county, of families, and of individuals. By providing for the housing needs of residents at all income levels, we can continue to grow and prosper as a county. We are considering this housing continuum. So the need for housing for incomes up to 100% of area median income, again, the focus of the plan, by considering different levels of need, there is a different approach required at each level and different resources needed. This is an organizing feature of the plan to help us kind of break it down and identify appropriate and adequate solutions at each level. And just to give you an idea of how this works, on the far left of this continuum, we have older adults, senior members of our community who maybe are on a fixed income, Social Security. They may need the support of a low-cost rental unit that maybe is subsidized or in one of our tax credit apartment complexes, so reduced rent. They may also need some support services to help them. Likewise, within our community, we have young families who are trying to buy their first home. They may need the help of a down payment loan or grant. And so they're a little farther up on the continuum. They may have higher income, but they still need help gaining access in the housing market. So just to give you an idea of what we're considering in terms of different types of approaches and resource needs along the continuum. We're using the 2019 comp plan land use policy as our framework as well. So we're taking the direction from the plan. It offers many opportunities for adding to the supply of housing in the county. So this map shows you our suburban policy area, in which are also our urban policy areas around the metro stations. This area, as planned, will allow for 25,000 additional housing units that are not permitted. So they're not in the pipeline. So those are opportunities, and there are opportunities in areas like our transit centers where higher densities are allowed. In areas where mixed use, so adding some residential to what used to be business parks, that shows up on the pink areas on the map now are mixed use areas along Route 7, Route 28, and to the west of the airport. There are also areas designated for reinvestment where there are opportunities to integrate housing, but especially unmet housing needs, housing units within those areas. So we want to attract investment from the private sector in these areas and include housing that addresses the needs of households up to 100% of area median income. I would note we're considering, and the plan certainly gives support for opportunities in areas that might now be obsolete. So retail centers maybe that have kind of lived their natural market supported life and maybe have opportunities for some integration of housing. So all of those areas provide places where new housing and housing that meets our housing need could be integrated. We've also done an extensive review of our inventory. So what are our assets? We're considering housing as infrastructure. We need to have housing in place to support our workforce and support our community. So we've looked at and developed data on the type, age, value, size, condition. We've looked at housing that the market is providing that fits in that affordability range, with the intent of developing strategies for preserving it. We've looked at our job centers within the county and where we have housing that's more affordable close to those centers for the workforce, and where we need to add housing. So all of those things will be forthcoming to the board as they consider the plan. We've also considered the programs we have in place that are tremendous assets. Our Economic Development Authority, the loan program for affordable housing developers, our inclusionary housing program provided for in the zoning ordinance. So our approach includes 4 basic strategies. Production, which is add to the housing supply for households with incomes from 0 to 100% of area median income. So ensuring that some of the supply addresses unmet housing need. Preservation, protecting the housing supply that currently addresses unmet need. Access, helping households obtain housing that's affordable. And then probably the most important is the structure, establishing how we will work together, both the private sector and the public sector, to address unmet need. So to kind of take those strategies and develop them a little bit more, wanted to give you some insight into the types of things we're looking at. And this has been informed by certainly the data that we have studied through the housing needs assessment. A lot of the input we've received from studies over the years, the nighttime economy, what the Economic Development Advisory Committee has done in terms of housing, ad hoc housing and transit-oriented development recommendations, but also what we're learning from best practices. So we've looked at our neighbors in the region. We've looked at what's happening across the country to identify strategies that will work for us based on our needs. And so this is a sampling of some of the things that we are considering. Some of them, as I said, are regulatory. So when you look in that orange block under production, providing incentives, many of those incentives will be part of the zoning ordinance and are appropriately part of the zoning ordinance, but providing a way to entice the private sector to either reposition what has already been permitted but not built. So in that suburban policy area of the county, that eastern part of the county, we have 22,000 units that have not been built but have been permitted. Can we influence those units to have more affordability within them? So by being able to provide some incentives, we're already providing a loan to help it bring in low-income housing tax credit investment to the county. It's been pretty successful. We want to have more things like that, but also include in our zoning ordinance other enticements to bring the investment in. For preservation, we are looking at what is affordable and how we can potentially acquire and preserve it as affordable, especially sensitive to redevelopment and ensuring that we're not destroying housing that's affordable, but adding to it. For access, what are the ways we can help people obtain housing? So it could be through substantial investment, through shared equity housing programs, enhancing our down payment program, pursuing additional subsidies through the federal government, and so forth, and then partnerships. And we need to strengthen our partnerships. We've worked closely with the private sector over the years. They've provided substantial number of affordable units through the Affordable Dwelling Unit Program. We are now working with a whole new group of affordable housing developers who have come to the county because we have things we can offer them to help them make affordable housing happen here. So groups like Cornerstones, Arlington Partnership for Affordable Housing, and some of the other developers that have come into the county to start developing some rental apartments to meet our unmet needs. So an emphasis of the plan is how we can strengthen those partnerships. We also have some work to do internally, and that is how can we work better as a county organization to ensure that housing is in the forefront and we take a whole systems approach to affordable housing. Now, all of this is going to cost money. We are looking at the assets we have. So we have a variety of federal funds, both through Community Development Block Grant. We have some state funding, some state subsidies. We have a housing trust that has been generated by our affordable dwelling unit program that we have used successfully, and we're leveraging that trust, as well as some proffered funds that have come in through negotiation with the development community as they've added new developments to the county. We're also looking at other sources and how we can bring those to bear on the issue, because it will be quite expensive, and we need to figure out a way to pay for the strategy. And so all of those things will be going to the board for their consideration early next year. Their plan is to have a public hearing and then deliberations on the plan strategies and what they want to put in place. The game plan for the plan is to have a set of yearly targets and introducing programs. Some programs are going to take longer to roll out. Some programs are going to be requiring financial resources that maybe are not available now that we may need to work towards. So it'll be a strategic plan in terms of how to integrate new programming as we move along over a five-year period. So with that, I just thank you again and really appreciate the chance to share where we are on the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan. We're close and look forward to presenting the full plan in the future, and look forward to answering questions. So thank you.
Lisa, can I ask you to come back and join us? And Sarah too? I just want to thank you both for being here this morning. I could listen to you both all day. You are both fantastic presenters. So thank you again for being here to discuss the state of housing in Loudoun County. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move to the Q&A portion of the program. As I noted earlier, and this is for the audience, I have questions, but I'm going to leave some time at the end for an audience Q&A. So if you haven't done so already, please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to as many questions as we can as time permits. So my first question is for Lisa. What is your extended outlook on how COVID-19 will have a long-term effect on the housing market, especially in urban areas which have lost significant number of residents to a suburban exodus?
Stacy, thanks for that question. I get this question a lot, and I think a lot of what we hear in the national media maybe is about places like New York City and San Francisco, where there indeed maybe has been a little bit of an exodus. It's a little bit overstated for most places, though, that people are fleeing urban areas. So I just want to put that out there first. I do think, though, what our data has shown is that interest on the home buying side really has shifted a little bit to what I mentioned, those ex-urban markets. And I think the long-term question is, will those ex-urban and rural markets continue to be kind of the destination for potential home buyers and renters? And what will it mean for as far as working from home? So I think the idea is, well, people can work from home right now. They can work anywhere. Children are doing school remotely. So why not, move to Winchester or to the Northern Neck or, down to Southwest Virginia or whatever. But as I mentioned, I think that what we're going to see post-COVID is a sort of a hybrid work from home environment, so that the strongest demand is still going to be where you can get to, the major employment centers in a relatively short amount of time. Over sort of, if you think in kind of 5 years from now, I think sort of this demand from millennials is still going to be strong, and millennials are now in their 30s, and in 5 years they'll be in their 40s. And so the demand for single family homes, space for kids is still going to be strong, and inventory in 5 years is still going to be tight. So I think we're going to be in this tight market post-COVID for at least a few years. Mortgage rates will start to edge up, but probably not until 2022 or 2023. But even with that, all those other fundamentals will remain in place.
Thank you. Thank you. This next question is actually for both of you. So maybe Sarah can kick off, and then Lisa, you can add your comments afterwards. What are the common misconceptions of the communities that we will be serving through creating more housing affordability in Loudoun County? And what have other, let's say, model communities done to overcome these misconceptions?
So I am taking your question to mean how people understand what the need is. And that it is not it's not an other, like it's not someone who is different from us. You know, we all, when you consider housing as a continuum, we all have our housing needs, and we all have we know what we can afford. And so that maximum of cost burden of using 30% of your income for housing applies, you know, across the spectrum. And so helping, I think just reiterating and helping people understand that it's all of us, and the issue affects us all in one way or the other. I think in terms of what we've seen with other communities, kind of how the message is shared, and kind of reiterating that who we're talking about, so making it real so people get it, and also that our workforce, our businesses need a variety of workers to be able to support the community. So I think getting that messaging out would be what I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would just add, I think, and Sarah, you know this as well, when we hear about concerns about housing, the two biggest concerns that are raised are around traffic and around schools, right? And so I think that they're understanding that there is a fiscal cost to putting housing in, and people talk about that fiscal cost a lot. But what we don't talk about, because it's a little harder to imagine, is the fiscal and economic benefit of having a sufficient supply of housing for folks all along the income spectrum. Healthy economies need people who have incomes at all kind of ranges across the spectrum. And so if the conversation stops around traffic and schools, then we're missing the other side of the ledger when we talk about the benefits that are associated with housing. And then I'll just add, and I think Loudoun County is doing a great job on this, and I think other communities have learned this as well, is you can't plan for housing in a vacuum, right? You have to plan for schools, and you have to plan for open space. You have to plan for transportation all at the same time. And encouraging more housing near the new metro stations, as Loudoun County is doing, is obviously a really important step in kind of integrating those planning exercises.
Thank you both for that. My next question is for Lisa. The Chamber strongly supports funding housing through dedicated tax funding rather than current ADU sales and developer contributions to the fund. Have you seen this type of jurisdictional commitment leveraged in other communities, and that we may consider modeling after?
So I think having a dedicated source of funding to support housing affordability activities is a critical cornerstone of any successful local housing affordability strategy. I think everyone would sort of agree to that. Programs like the ADU program that bring in revenue on a maybe unreliable or unable, you can't predict, are really challenging. And there have been a lot of communities that have done a lot of really important work on putting dedicated funding into local affordable housing trust funds that have been able to leverage other public and private sector funding to almost get like a 3-to-1 return on those dedicated public investments. So I think, and I know Loudoun has looked across the region and across the country at places that have really done a good job of setting up these revolving local funds that make very good use of an efficient use of the tax revenue in order to take advantage of other sources of funding. But to Sarah's point at the end, is there are lots of ways to use land use and zoning to help encourage and incentivize housing production, but there is going to be a need for financial resources, and a dedicated source of resources has been the most effective in the communities that I've taken a look at.
All right, my next question is for Sarah. Other than the obvious steps of the board's approval of the Unmet Housing Needs Strategic Plan, what do you feel is the most critical element in order for this plan to be successful?
Wow. Well, I think probably the most critical thing, and this is probably obvious, but it's got to be commitment to implementation of the plan. So when the plan is delivered to the board, hopefully it's something that they are, that hangs together for them and, is workable. But at the end of the day, there's got to be a commitment to make it happen. I think that's going to be the most critical piece of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And again, the community is here to support you. So oops, sorry about that. My next question is for Lisa. You touched on this earlier, but recently you shared on your blog that single family construction is booming in Virginia with monthly permits exceeding 2019 levels. Do you feel that this growth is strategically addressing housing affordability or simply meeting the housing needs for families with 100% AMI and above?
Oh yeah, this uptick is not housing affordable to folks in the lower part of the income spectrum for sure. And there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Well, first of all, the single family construction that's been underway, it's been really interesting, this shift to, when I look at the 4 major metro areas in the state, and the new permits are really for construction outside of those regions. I mean, by and large, there's been a little bit of a shift that in 2020, we've been seeing more home construction in exurban and rural areas. And there's lots of reasons why, builders build houses that are affordable at above 100% AMI. The first is there's demand there, right? As Sarah mentioned, there's demand all along the spectrum. So if you're a profit-driven builder, why not build to the part of the market where profit is going to be the greatest? And then there's places where it's really harder to build smaller, less expensive homes because of zoning and regulation. And then I'll mention, I'll mention the other 2 L's, right? So there's laws, which is the zoning, but then there's labor and lumber. And lumber prices have been on the rise during COVID. The National Association of Home Builders is suggesting that the tariffs and the increase in lumber prices is adding an average of $16,000 to the price of a typical new build here nationwide, but I would imagine here in Virginia. And the other is on the labor side. Labor shortages in the construction sector have been with us since the end of the last downturn. And so the pace of new home construction is limited by the lack of available labor. And so I think, to answer your question, there's certainly no signs that the new construction uptick is really serving that need we're talking about below 100% AMI. And there's some very clear reasons why that's the case.
Thank you for that. You know what? I am getting word that we have some really great questions from the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and switch us over to Grafton, who is my trusty sidekick and is going to help me by asking the questions that are coming in from the audience.
All right. Hey, good morning. We've got some great questions here from our audience. Thank you, everyone who is submitting them into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can while we have time. So please continue doing that. First question is from Delegate Ibrahim Samira. Delegates Samira, thank you for joining us today. And these questions are for both of y'all, so feel free just to jump in and we'll coordinate best we can. From Delegate Samira, why is there a lack of enthusiasm for building townhomes and multi-family units in Northern Virginia?
Sarah, do you want to kick it off with kind of what you're finding in Loudoun County on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say in general, I think it's probably, and Lisa, I think you answered this already with, traffic and more pressure on, schools and that kind of thing. But I'm saying this from the resident, from the adjoining residents kind of perspective, how they're seeing the negative impact of higher density on them. That would be my basic, response.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're still learning how to kind of integrate all that planning we talked about. I mean, I don't want to discount anybody's concerns about if a 50-unit townhome project goes in down the road and the road is the same road that's been there for 50 years. Traffic is a valid thing to come to somebody's mind, right? So I think we sometimes discount people's concerns about schools and traffic, saying, oh, they just don't want growth. And for some, they don't want growth. They like the way that it's been for the time they live there. But I think it's valid for us to make sure that as we talk about housing, we are talking about how we increase resources for public transit, we increase ease of access to public transportation. We think about how schools are built. Sometimes we think we need schools that look like they did the last few decades with big, huge campuses when kids are hardy, they can climb stairs and go up, and we can thinking new ways about how to work the sort of integrated planning process together has to be part of this. But I agree with Sarah. I think there's this sense that some of us, moved to the suburbs for a neighborhood that looked a certain way, and change is tough. And I think that it's a part of having this conversation to explain the benefits that come along with introducing some of these new housing models to certain neighborhoods, and kind of increasing the education has got to be part of it. But I think listening too, I don't think you can just shoot down somebody's concerns because it doesn't match your worldview, right, of what things should look like. I think it has to be an opening salvo and kind of a conversation.
Yeah, agreed.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Tracy Baynard with McGuire Woods. Tracy asks, could each of you share your findings or thoughts on the relative need for additional rental versus ownership affordable housing units? Is one going to be harder to address than the other?
That's a good question. Sarah, do you have the numbers on the rental versus homeownership need from the study?
I don't have it off the top of my head, so sorry about that. But I know it's there, so we can't get that detail. But, I think that's a complicated question because I think it does get into, we were just talking about not in my backyard, NIMBY, but also it talks about, they're two very different things, right? So, but it also considers, what's the land use plan? What's our vision for where different densities will go? So townhouses versus apartments versus single family homes. So that also helps guide supply and location, which also gets to tenure, right? But I think, certainly we've put an emphasis on rental housing, especially for low income and using the low income housing tax credit program as a real need. And the housing needs assessment does identify the cost burden for renters below 60% of area median income, which is the cap for tax credits, which is a federal program, is almost 80% of renters in that group are cost burden. So there's a huge need. I think the slide did include at least the current cost burden numbers, Lisa. So if you want to answer, I'll pull that slide back up and go ahead.
Yeah. I think the question's a great one. And you mentioned, Sarah, the low income housing tax credit. And so when you ask kind of which is harder or which creates more challenges, I think the first thing, and I know the county's doing this, is like, if the county is not taking advantage of non-local financial resources to the fullest extent they can, like the low income housing tax credit, that's your first step, right? Before, if you think about, whether it's challenging to produce rental housing affordable at below 60% AMI, well, the low income housing tax credit program is there. And so figuring out a way to position the county to be as competitive as possible to get that funding feels really important to me because it's there. On the homeownership side, and before I turn it back over to Sarah, I think it's a little bit more challenging. There's no kind of existing programs to support the construction of, there's certainly Habitat for Humanity of Northern Virginia is a great resource for some of those lower cost housing options. But on the financing side, on the multifamily side, you also have to pay attention to that. For years, condo financing was really tricky. And so it was really harder for the private sector to build multifamily ownership property. So I think there's a few different things there, but I think Sarah's going to point back to the fact that this need at below 60% AMI really is the greatest.
Yeah, so the slide in the PowerPoint I presented has current need, existing need, cost burden at 8,400, and that 75% of households below 100% AMI. So huge need. And that's for below 60%. So it's that whole range. But that's one reason we put an emphasis on trying to attract more tax credit investment in the county, is because of that large need. Now, interestingly, as we mature or grow into 2040, the needs start shifting to the higher parts of the 100%. So closer, so 80%, 90% is where we're going to have larger percentages of need for housing to support. So it kind of starts shifting as we grow into those numbers by 2040.
And just to, not to belabor, but at the end of the day, we can talk about 60% and 80% and 90%. There needs to be more housing. Like that could be a full stop sentence. In you know what I mean? Like, so I think sometimes, I mean, I'm partly responsible for this, for spending a lot of time figuring out what the exact need is at different income levels. And I think to Sarah's point about like commitment, like if we spend too much time getting hung up on what narrow band we need to target, then without taking action, it kind of doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to that, and there's a big emphasis in our comp plan for diversity in unit types. So that's one thing Loudoun really needs. We don't have too many options for different types of families and different types of households. That plays into affordability and also addressing needs. So again, I to your point, I agree with that, Lisa. You're right. Thanks.
Excellent. All right, our next question is from Kirsten Langhorn of Langhorn Custom Homes and the vice chair of our Public Policy Committee. She says, Sarah, you've done amazing work these last few years working with affordable housing developers. Thank you for that. From your research on possible solutions, are there specific private-public investment tools that you'd like to see introduced or enhanced in our county?
So that's a good question, and thank you, Kirsten, for the kind words. I appreciate it, and I just appreciate being able to work with the development community and working with the public sector on this important issue. It's been I'm very committed to it, but it's really been a team effort, and it can't be done alone. So thank you, and thanks for your participation over time. There's some really big things that Loudoun could do that other communities are doing in terms of working together. So, we talk about the monetary support for the issue, and we've looked at some best practice examples across the country for community funding, so community trusts. Just a couple of examples. Charlotte, North Carolina has just put together, they did a general obligation bond offering that put $50 million on the table, and the private sector, so the institutions, the large banks and businesses came together and put another, I think it was over 50 million on the table. So they ended up with $100 million to start addressing their affordable housing needs, and that was the community working together. Now that is a really that's a big example of something, but I do think that we have opportunities here. This is a loving, caring community, and we just need to pull ourselves together and figure out the best way forward. I do think the funding aspect of this is going to be critical. So that's why, I point that out. And that's being replicated. I know Richmond is looking at a similar type of community fund to support housing. So thanks for the question.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Carrie Wilson, and we may have touched on this a little bit before, but an opportunity to dive in specifically on senior housing. How are we considering senior affordable rental housing in the near term over the next 5 years?
So again, this is an area, so seniors or older adults over 62 is a growing demographic the county. So there's a need. It's not a huge percentage, but it has a more robust growth than other age groups in our demographic. And part of it is that we have a population that is aging, and so people are staying here, and then they have different needs. So we have been working to attract some housing for older adults. We've got a project that the Board of Supervisors provided almost a $6 million loan to on Route 7 called Mount Sterling. That'll be almost 100 units of older adult housing. But there is a need for it and a place for it, along with the diversity of other types of need that we have in the county.
Great, thank you. All right, we're gonna end the event with two final questions from two members of our Board of Supervisors. So the first question is going to be to both of you from Supervisor Julie Briskman of the Algonquian District. I feel as if our partners are tied to only building rentals with funding options right now, with the funding options available right now. Knowing that home ownership is the key to generational wealth, how can we help our partners finance for low-income home ownership development or revitalization?
Yeah, I'll jump in first just on some ideas. I think that's right. I think there, like I mentioned, there's a lot more existing financial tools available for lower cost rental housing. On the homeownership side, I think there are ways to make sure that the existing land use and zoning provides the right incentives to create homeownership opportunities that are at more affordable price points. So to the first question about, for example, around townhomes, making sure that, or even smaller lot single family homes, making sure that the zoning can allow for the construction of homes that are at more affordable price points. I think, there's been a lot of talk right now about President-elect Biden's $15,000 tax credit for first-time home buyers. So down payment assistance can also be a critical point on the demand side to help allow folks to get into home ownership. And then again, those new models of housing, which may not be existing in the county, but which Sarah mentioned are really part of the plan to include, more of those smaller multifamily ownership opportunities is going to be critical for increasing home ownership in the county, I would argue.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have too much more to add. I think that was a good answer. So some of the things we are looking at are, we do have a down payment and closing cost assistance program, evaluated that program, how can we improve it? But also just the idea of shared equity housing, which is a little bit more of a bigger investment. So that is putting some substantial funds into housing to help people get into the housing market that stays in the housing. Again, that's a financing thing. So we're going to have to figure out how we would pay for that. But that is something we're definitely also looking at, as well as, we have the affordable dwelling unit program. It's provided 2,700 units for purchase. How does that mature as a program and continue to provide some home ownership opportunities? So.
All right. Last question is from Supervisor Mike Turner of the Ashburn District, directed towards Sarah, but Lisa, feel free to jump in. Sarah, I believe funding for the Housing Trust Fund comes primarily from the sale of affordable units that have gone to market rate. Isn't that counterproductive? And if so, how much annual funding from other sources would increase the Housing Trust Fund to meet the strategic plan's needs each year?
So that's a great question. Thank you, Supervisor Turner. The first thing I would say, so that is right. The trust that we have is generated from the market sale of affordable dwelling units. So when an ADU that is a purchase unit reaches its first control period, the first part of the covenant, 15 years, the homeowner has the ability to sell it at market, and they split the difference between the ADU value and the market sale with the county. So that money has been coming into the trust. Roughly about $2 million a year has come into the trust, and the board has set up a revolving loan fund that has gone into to low-income housing tax credit rental properties in the county. So that's the way that's worked. So it is true. Based on the design of the current ADU program, we're losing those purchase units to then be able to put the money into low-income housing tax credits. So, there is a trade-off there, and it's creating a deficit on the home ownership side by doing it. So one thing for the board to consider is, do we extend those covenants so that doesn't happen anymore? And there's a way we can do it, and we actually are promoting that. We think that's a good thing. But that would then start turning off the spigot to the trust. So we got to figure out another way to capitalize that. And honestly, we're still working on the financial strategy, so I don't have a good answer for you yet on what it's going to take. So I'm going to have to defer that for our future discussions in the next couple of months about how we'll be able to pay for things and what the right amount is to have in that trust. I think the board has been smart, set it up as a revolving loan, and it's stable from that standpoint. So that, that's a smart move, but we've got a lot of needs. So how are we going to be able to pay for that need? We are looking at things like Community Development Block Grant Program. A substantial amount of money comes to the county as an entitlement, 1.4 million this year. There are ways we can leverage that money, like through the Section 108 program, for example. So you may have some other alternatives there that are not necessarily generated, other sources that are not necessarily local tax funding, and so forth. So we'll be bringing those things to you all to discuss and figure, what's the best plan of attack.
All right. Well, hey, I'm looking at the clock, realizing that's probably all the time we have for today. So Stacy, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Grafton. And I want to give a big thank you to our wonderful panelists, Lisa and Sarah. This is our last PolicyMaker series event for 2020, and I'm so grateful that you were able to join us for this important discussion that impacts us all. And Lisa, we agree, there does need to be more housing. Full stop, exclamation point. I would also like to thank our audience for your help in shaping this dialogue. Your questions were amazing. And again, thank you to our sponsors, the 2020 PolicyMaker Series signature sponsor, Inova Loudoun Hospital, and today's spotlight sponsors, Toth Financial and M&T Bank. I also want to thank all of our 2020 PolicyMaker Series advocate and enterprise sponsors. And finally, let me say a big thank you to our elected officials, the Chamber Board of Directors, and our honored guests who joined us today. This concludes today's event. Thank you all. Have a safe and healthy business day and holiday season.